Wayne, we mentioned this earlier, industrials actually doing
yeah,
really
no, look,
well
yes,
today,
SAB is strong. Richmond in particular was very strong. The retailers were very strong. So the day was for industrials. Surprised that I suppose the stronger rand took a bit of shine off the resource shares today, because this rand strengthens big time, yeah.
Anglo-American,
The last couple of days.
at 309 rand.
Yeah.
Up 1.6%.
Yeah, but look,
so rolling quite nicely since a few months ago.
I mean, as long as you believe that China is still, Chinese growth won't disappear. These Anglos and Bulletins are at low PE ratios. They're not expensive. They're not expensive as long as China holds.
Anglo-American is up. We've got BHP, which is down slightly today. Yeah. Sasol also shedding some ground. It seems that the energy component.
But I mean, you can see the screen. The MTN up 3%. Steinhoff up 1.6. Yeah. Vodacom up. You know, it was actually a very strong day. But Richmond's one of the big ones. That's up 2% The SAB up 2%. And then you look at the retailer, Shoprite up 2%. Banks, I don't think were great. ABSA was up a reasonable amount earlier on that I saw, but the banking sector certainly didn't beat the industrials.
Any specific reason that Investec is actually much lower today, down half of
Investec's had a big rally, yeah. I think that's just a little bit of, maybe a bit of, you know, whenever you don't know what actually happened, you just say it's profit taking.
Okay, so into next week, any strong positions that you'll be taking with the market, Wayne?
No, now, you know, when the market was down at 28,000, literally a month and a bit ago, it was relatively easy to say, let's buy. It's not so easy to say it now. It's a big rally we've had. It's a big rally, and I mean, I know the PE on the market's not astronomical high, and more or less earnings should be okay for the next year or two, as long as China holds, you know, with that, always have that little qualification. But the market's not, it's not a huge value at this level. I
think it's time to talk on the medium-term budget policy statement that was tabled by Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan a little earlier this week, and now joining us on the desk is an economist. So Dawie Roodt from the Efficient Group. Thank you so much, Dawie, for joining us. What really stuck out for you? I mean, we know that the deficit. We've got debt to GDP 40% by 2014. Is there anything that really stuck out for you?
Two things. The first of all, the minister is quite negative. I think a little bit too pessimistic.
He actually started the conversation by talking about how the turbulence and the winds of turbulence have actually hit the market.
The Europeans. I think the financial crisis is over, by the way, in Europe.
I agree with you.
It is over. It must be over, because the alternative is a global depression. That's really the alternative. They will fix the problems in Europe. It doesn't mean the economic problems are over, but the financial problems are over in Europe. They are going to print money. Simple as that. To bail out the Greeks and many other countries in Europe. The same as
Merkel actually came out a short while ago and said that we've got to be careful that no other country comes to the fore and asks for a 50% haircut.
Angela Merkel is playing a brilliant game. She just proved the past couple of days that she is the leader in Europe. What we've just seen the last couple of days is the creation of a new country. It's called the United States of Europe.
Of Germany.
Of Germany, perhaps, maybe even. Because that is essentially what is going to happen. There will be a central transfer mechanism from Germany to the rest of the other countries in Europe. And for that, the Germans are going to demand a couple of things.
Yeah, look, there's going to be lots of German policemen looking at the country's books now.
Exactly. So financial crisis is over.
So it won't happen again.
It doesn't mean the economic crisis is over. The Europeans and Americans are not going to grow for a very, very long time. Coming back to South Africa, two things in the budget. The Minister of Finance is very negative. More negative than I think he should be. I think economic growth is going to be a little bit better. The second one is there was a real serious warning from the Minister of Finance that our civil servants are overpaid. We've got a bloated civil service in South Africa, and do not expect another totally ridiculous increase in their wages. And there are many numbers to prove this. Our civil servants are simply overpaid. We have to cut back on this. I was speaking to Patrick Craving last night, and he told me troubles are coming. That means that you're going to see quite a nice fight between COSATU and the ANC.
Okay, so during the break, I battled to keep you gentlemen quiet because you were debating.
Wayne,
could you tell us what you were debating on?
Yeah, no, look, this is, I want Dawie to show some light on it. One of our chaps now, I don't understand all this macroeconomic mumbo jumbo and that, but one of our people said to me...
Few people do.
Yeah, I said, one of our people said to me that the government is somehow paying for some of their capital expenditure out of some emergency reserve fund, and it all sounded a little bit like printing money to me. What's the actual story?
Remember the Reserve Bank. Let me just get a little bit of background to this. Remember the Reserve Bank can literally print money.
That's what they do, yeah.
And they can literally destroy money. They can do this. The Reserve Bank is, let's call it a little bit out of the economy. Now, there's there was an account created called the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve Account. Now that is the account that the Reserve Bank created for the losses on the forward book of the Reserve Bank in the past.
Yes.
Now that account has been paid off, the losses on that has been paid off by government in the meantime. But the Minister of Finance got a problem. He had a problem in the last couple of years in that his tax collections were much more than what he thought it's going to be.
Yeah.
And all this money was lying in the bank. And of course it's a problem for the Minister of Finance because the other ministers are going to say, listen, but you've got the money in the bank, give it to us. So what he did, he simply transferred it to the Reserve Bank, which suited the Reserve Bank at that stage because the Reserve Bank wanted to drain liquidity out of the market. When they bought rands or when they bought dollars, they sold rands, and this is an opportunity for the Reserve Bank to drain money out of the economy, and the total amount is 130 billion rand. That is what the Reserve Bank owes the Minister of Finance in a way. So effectively, the Reserve Bank can transfer 130 billion rand to the Minister of Finance. Please don't tell. Please don't. There's nothing funny about this.
Okay, so
please don't tell Kusatu about it. Please, 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 please. Don't tell Kusatu. But essentially is that the Reserve Bank destroyed 130 billion rand. Remember, don't look at it as, it's not a matter of destroying in a normal sense of the word. They can destroy money and they can create money out of
nothing. I'm so glad you mentioned that because when I was listening to the Minister's speech, I was hearing this whole, the reserves and we delving into the specific fund, and it was almost like a string of information that actually went through. And I remember when we were speaking to the Economist straight after the analysis, or we were doing the analysis, that it was also just, it was so vague. Why wasn't there a proper explanation put on the table, would you say?
But because it's quite difficult to understand for people. I mean, economists don't even understand this thing about creating money and destroying money. Whenever the Reserve Bank tells you, like, by the way, this thing about the Reserve Bank giving this loan to the Swazis, which is on and off, I don't know where it is at the moment, that is, and if whenever the Reserve Bank gives this money, it's nothing but printing the money out of nothing. While if it happens from the Treasury, it's our money, it's tax money. Yeah, that's a big difference.
With regards to the way that we're going to fund this deficit, it seems that we're going to be rolling over the debt as opposed to adopting and getting new paper into the market. So is this a good thing? Because it could actually change the curve of the bond yield. That's what some investors and analysts have said.
We've always been doing this. I mean, the debt has always been rolled over. Remember, there are two very important numbers here. The one is a nominal number and the other one is a real number. A nominal number, and in fact, the total debt of government at the moment of the state is, well, R1 trillion. It's a huge number. It's about 35% relative to GDP. And that 35% relative to GDP is a real number. It's an actual number. It gives us a better picture of what's really going on. So what happens in practice is that government borrows money today, and some of these loans will fall due over time, and we'll simply replace it with more loans.
And that's why there's a difference.
It's a rolling process.
And that's why there's a difference between the deficit for the year and what's called the public sector borrowing requirement. The requirement includes all the other loans that they've got to pay back, which they just rolled.
They simply roll it.
They just, so the government's never paid back a debt. They just pay you back with money they got from someone else. So they never actually pay back the capital. They raise another bond to pay back the capital on the old bond. So it's
this is why it's concerning that debt to GDP is going to be at 40%, Dawie.
Probably. And my estimates suggest that debt to GDP is going to be higher than 40%. But there's an inherent conflict here between the Reserve Bank and Treasury, because Treasury wants inflation. Because it's good for Treasury to have inflation because their debt is eroded, it's reduced through inflation. The Reserve Bank's responsibility is to make sure inflation stays low. And that's why it's important to have a Reserve Bank that's independent from the politicians.
Absolutely, because then we might just see what happened north of our borders, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And sometimes far north of our borders.
Yes, to the US even, to inflate our way out of debt.
Far north of our borders.
It seems that many economies are adopting this policy. But isn't that a scary scenario as...
No, it's not scary.
I mean, the fact that we never pay off debt?
No government ever pays off debt.
Because it's such a fine balancing act, and we've seen
no government. I mean, it's not dissimilar to us when our car...
So
when you come to the end of the car, we take another loan to buy another car.
So what do you do, Wayne? You just make sure that you increase growth so dramatically that it naturally
Dawie's 100% right. You've got to watch that total debt. You've got to watch that total debt number. Now, it used to be, what, 20-odd% a couple of years ago?
It was around about 20%.
And now it's going to 40. That's life.
When Trevor Manuel took over,
100.
When Trevor Manuel took over, it was 50% relative to GDP. Yeah. That's why economists like to express things relative to something else, like to the size, like relative to GDP, for instance. So he brought it down to about 20-odd%, and it's probably going to increase to about 40-odd% over the next 2 or 3 years or so. And that is getting quite high. I've done some calculations on the NHI, and I can tell you, if we have to spend a little bit more on the expenditure side on the budget, we are going to get into trouble. Yeah. We're really pushing it now.
But
we simply can't afford the NHI.
A couple of little qualifications. We're not in trouble for the next 5 years, maybe the next decade. Yeah. But unless the tax base increases, we can't afford the expenses, i.e. simplistically grants and NHI. We've got to get a bit more
tax. And corporate taxes actually are not, they haven't even recovered to the levels pre-crisis.
Tax increases will depend on the ability of the economy to grow jobs. I mean, that's the bottom line. If we don't grow jobs in the next decade, let's say, then we look at a government that could be in fiscal trouble. It's not today's problem. It's further out, but we must be critically aware of this because, and we can argue the merits of NHI, and I don't think anyone will give you the right answer because quite frankly, no one knows. But it's coming, and maybe it should come, but it's coming, and it's going to cost more. Another thing on grants never go down, Grants never go down.
Except if you have inflation. Just by the way, we don't have a decade. We've probably got about 2 or 3 years, by the way.
Yeah, we can argue that.
And when we're going to start getting into trouble. And the grants, you're absolutely right. The only way to reduce grants is through inflation. Yeah. But fiscal finances as it is, and I think the Minister of Finance is absolutely right. The civil servants service is a bloated, overpaid institution. We have to do something about that.